This morning's question of faith is about the connection between faith and the things we worry about. Or maybe not the things we worry about so much as the degree to which we worry about those things. The question is, how can faith help me stop worrying so much? So if I could have a conversation with the person who submitted this question, I might be tempted to ask, how much is so much? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how full is your worry bucket? And if that person could answer me, I'm guessing he or she might say, well, it's pretty full. Because statistically, that would be right on target. You see, we are worriers by nature. And there are plenty of things in life worthy of our worry. I tried to make a mental note this week of concerns I overheard either personally or professionally, and without breaking any confidences, I can tell you I heard worries about family members, children, siblings, aging parents, mixed in with concern regarding pets, property, health, finances, and of course, politics. I noted concern for the environment, for immigrants, for threats of war, and for what the church will look like in the future. This congregation, the United Church of Christ, and the Christian church in general. I went shopping with my daughter for clothes for her senior pictures. Plenty to worry about there. I spent another hour on the phone with my insurance company trying to get an early refill on a prescription I'll need while I'm away. Don't even get me started on that. In various settings just this week, I've heard people worry out loud about job security, rainfall amounts, test results, Medicare, Medicaid, affordable housing, whether they are loved for who they are, whether a treasured friendship has been forever broken, and whether they'll get everything done in time to catch their flight tonight. Oh, wait, that was me again, sorry. What worries me about all these things, which is just a snapshot of a week's worth of worries in my relatively quiet and highly privileged corner of the world, is that these are just the things I heard, the things we were willing to say out loud. For everything we're willing to name, just how many worries do we hold inside of us? And what does that worry do to us? We are worriers by nature, and when worry becomes complicated and compounded, it looks like anxiety, and anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in our country. More than 40 million American adults, they say, fight a daily battle with it. It's more than 18% of us, not to mention children and adolescents, and only slightly more than a third of those are treated. There's all kinds of reasons for that: access, or rather lack of access to health care, especially related to mental illness, the stigma we associate with mental illness and mental health, shame, an inability to admit it, to ask for help, to acknowledge when our worry bucket is just too full to carry on our own. The whole thing is worrisome. How can faith help us stop worrying so much? I'm not sure the answer is as easy as we'd like it to be. Jesus' words in Matthew 6 sound so simple. Don't worry. Just don't. Don't worry about your life, what you'll drink, what you'll wear, what you'll eat, which is easily quotable when you're a mom with means shopping with a 17-year-old for just the right outfit. But it's a little too simplistic for the harder stuff. Some years ago, I had surgery, and when I had just been released from the hospital, a mother of one of my kids' friends came over to my house, and she came right into the living room where I was trying to rest. I remember my normally mild-mannered lab started to growl, and he moved closer to my recliner. My fur baby was worried for me as this woman leaned in before she asked whether she could pray for me. And before I could even answer, she prayed. And I mean, she really, really prayed up and down and backward and forward. And my dog started barking, and she kept praying. And finally, when she was done, she turned around and left with all kinds of platitudes of assurance that all would be well. And I know she had good intentions, but the manner in which she shared her faith did not decrease my stress level at all. Maybe some of you have experienced similar sentiments in other forms. Just believe on the Lord Jesus. Have faith. Don't worry. Might as well say abracadabra or hocus pocus. If only we could get by with just having faith and not really having to do anything with it. And if only having faith meant we could be worry-free without a care in the world. But some fears just run too deep for magic words to cast them out. I realized this week, spending time at the General Synod gathering in Milwaukee, that I think it's possible that my faith, our faith, actually adds to the list of things I worry about instead of making that list smaller. If you're looking for a faith tradition that lets you leave the cares of this world behind and out of sight, life in the United Church of Christ might not be what you're seeking. This is a church built for worrying, especially for those too often and too quickly dismissed with shallow prayers and empty words. This week, my church, and more than that, my faith tradition, because I understand all of this to be deeply and historically rooted in who God calls us to be, made me proud, but also significantly and rightly heightened my worry over the treatment of undocumented immigrants, about the myriad effects of the opioid crisis in our country, for women whose access to basic health care and reproductive justice is being increasingly denied, and for how we will surely all benefit when the seats of power in every institution start to reflect the rainbow of God's diversity. This week, as happens almost every week that I pay attention, my faith did not absolve me of worry over climate change or the separation of families at our borders. My faith put those scenarios directly in my gaze. How can my faith help me stop worrying so much? I'd love to give you an easy answer. Just say this prayer, recite this verse. But it's a harder question than you might think if the Jesus you follow insists you love your neighbor no matter who they are. And if the Bible you read commands you to care for the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. And if the gospel that is your good news insists that you think more about what you have to give than what you think you need to take from someone else. When I hear Jesus say things like, don't worry about what you'll wear or what you'll eat or what you'll drink, I suspect it's less about the not worrying and more about where I should focus my concern instead. Because later in Matthew's gospel, we hear that it's when we clothe the naked, feed the hungry, and offer somebody else a cup of cool water, cool, clean, unpolluted water to quench their thirst, that we find Jesus squarely in front of us. I've been reading, on Steve Herby's recommendation, Johann Hari's book, Lost Connections, about alternative responses to the pervasiveness of depression and anxiety. I appreciate, and I want to be sure to reiterate here, that he doesn't say his ideas are true for everyone, but he does make compelling arguments about how instead of prescribing away the problem, more lasting benefits are possible when human beings help each other reconnect to nature, to meaningful values, to purposeful work, to each other. Here's an example of what he's talking about. He tells the story at one point of how pharmaceutical companies were struggling to distribute antidepressants in Cambodia. Researchers were sure that life in Cambodia, where rice farmers were too often encountered landmines left behind from old wars and daily survival was a struggle at best, surely people there were somehow destined for higher rates of anxiety and depression and would be in need of these medications. So when asked about the prevalence of depression, the Cambodians said, yes, they knew some people who experienced such things, like There was a rice farmer, they said, who'd lost a leg to a landmine and struggled to recover after he received an artificial limb. But the Cambodians told the researchers, "We already have antidepressants for people like this." Here's the longer quote. "When they realized this man was despondent, the doctors and his neighbors sat with him and talked through his life and his troubles. They realized that even with his new artificial limb, his old job working in the rice paddies was just too difficult, and he was constantly stressed and in physical pain, and that was making him want to just stop living and give up. So they had an idea. They believed that he would be perfectly capable of being a dairy farmer, and that would involve less painful walking on his false leg and fewer disturbing memories. So they bought him a cow. In the months and years that followed, his life changed. His depression, which had been profound, went away. You see, they reported, the cow was an analgesic and antidepressant. To them, an antidepressant wasn't about changing your brain chemistry. It was about the community together, empowering the depressed person to change his life." End quote. And I realize I'm getting a little bit loose with my connectors here. Just because you're worried doesn't mean you're depressed. Just because you're depressed doesn't mean you struggle with anxiety, though they more often than not go hand in hand. And the person who submitted this question of faith might only be struggling with her 17-year-old's wardrobe choices. And it would be my prayer that that was the case, and then 3 Hail Marys should probably do the trick. But I wonder if what Johann Hari suggests about the role of community in empowering individuals to reorient their lives has something to do with how faith, the faith I believe we're called to share here, can begin to lighten the load of our buckets full of worry. How can faith help you stop worrying so much? Start with prayer. Breathe. Take time, make time to pray and to breathe and to worship. I mean, how many other hours during the week do you set down your smartphone, or did you? The Gospels tell us that Jesus took time away for prayer and reflection. And the Bible is a lot more clear about honoring the Sabbath than it is about all kinds of other things people tell us to worry about. But what if our faith calls us to go even deeper? Because we aren't just called to practice faith or participate in these rituals of prayer and worship alone. We're called to pray together and to breathe together and to be in community together. Living in community like this doesn't necessarily change the situations I'm most worried about right now. But boy, does it help sometimes to know I'm not the only one who's ever lost sleep waiting for a test result, or worrying over my kid's future, or wondering what I can do to show up on the side of justice and peace. Being a member of a church community might add responsibilities and commitments to my week, but subtracts from my need to go it alone. If I can't come up with words to pray, I can lean on tradition, or I can trust one of you is praying for both of us, or that we will all somehow be praying for each other. Identifying with a denomination, a tradition that isn't afraid to identify with the marginalized, means I get to learn every day how God keeps calling you and me to be a part of creating something better for God's world. And it gives me hope, which is the best antidote to worry there can be. How can faith help us stop worrying so much? Maybe knowing that there's a place for us here with each other and with a God who loves each and every one of us, maybe that's a good start. A place and a community where we're all welcome, whether our worries are superficial, chronic, chemical, or pathological, where we can learn how to listen enough to each other and even for each other, and even for the many others we have yet to know, deeply enough to discover whether we or they need a pill, a prayer, a shawl, or a cow, if that's what might be most helpful. So we go out to the same world we left behind not quite an hour ago, but maybe we are somehow changed. Mary Oliver wrote this about worrying. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I am, well, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing and gave it up and took my old body and went out into the morning and sang. May it be so. Amen.